No one is doing the work. This idea that, I'll just explore privacy when I need it isn't going to cut it. Privacy could be outlawed by the time.
Today, I'm super excited to have Naomi Brockwell on the channel. We've been following each other's stuff for a long time. We've been on Signal, but now she is putting out this Surveillance Accountability Act that I really wanted to talk about, ask her some questions about it, and also put it in front of your court. If this bill passes, it would pretty much require the federal government to just get a warrant before buying your location data, your financial records, or your private information from data brokers. So they actually have to go through the proper channels that are typically required. Now, we also expand beyond that. We talk about the bill itself, of course, what it does, what it doesn't do, and why it matters. But we also go through her three-pillar approach to privacy advocacy, why decentralization and privacy aren't the same thing and don't guarantee one another, even though people treat them like they do, the legal pressure that privacy advocates are facing in 2026 and why it can't just be about technology, and why she's still optimistic about the fight, and of course, how you can get involved. It was a very dense, packed interview, and I think you guys are going to like this one. Let's get into it. All right, Naomi, I've had you on Signal now for a few years. We've kind of teased doing something together for a long time. And I think now with this bill that you're trying to put forward, we finally had a really good reason. Well, we always had a good reason to bring you on, but we had a reason to no longer put off bringing you on. So welcome.
We couldn't
to Techlore
justify
Talks.
putting it off for sure. But this has been a long time coming, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I love your stuff. You guys are just such a force for good when it comes to fighting the surveillance state and teaching people about privacy. So thank you for everything that you do.
Yeah, you as well. And I remember you've just blown up so much over the years, because I remember when I found you and you were smaller and I'm like, oh, this is pretty cool and pretty good. And then boom, you just blew right by us. So it's cool to see. I'm glad that we see so many people getting traction. We're one of the smaller people in the spaces now on our end, which is crazy because there's other large creators too. So it is cool to see this space evolve.
I think that watching this space has been really interesting because people like you were really trailblazers. Before anyone was sounding the alarm about the surveillance state, you're out there creating content and teaching people how to protect themselves. And it is exciting, actually, to see more people start to put out content because there's way too much ground for any one person to cover. And the surveillance state gets so much larger every single day. Their tools get more advanced with the introduction of AI into all of their surveillance machinery. It's just getting harder and harder to cover all of the threats that might be out there. And I think that we need more people, and we need not just creators, but we need individuals to really start stepping up and participating in this privacy economy. I don't think we'll win if we don't do that. We have to kind of make this normal and make this a mainstream ideal.
Yeah, and I definitely want to touch on this towards the end because I want to hear, I hear optimism when you're talking. So I want to hear from you why you still have optimism and what people can do and the tangible things that maybe you can share with them by the end of the interview. I just wanted to start and just touch on you for a second. Why do you talk about privacy, surveillance, digital freedom? Where did this start for you personally?
Yeah, it started, my channel really started as a cryptocurrency channel. I was very interested in Austrian economics. When Bitcoin came along, it seemed like alternative money could be a tool for freedom. I really liked this separation of money and state and the idea that you might be able to have an alternative money that couldn't be shut down. We've seen alternative monies, exist throughout history, and governments, if there's a choke point, don't like competition. They're thoroughly debasing the currency all the time. And so, if something alternative comes along, it tends to be shut down pretty quickly. This was a decentralized infrastructure that I found super interesting. So I started out focused on decentralized tech, this idea that what if we could have tech that didn't have choke points that could be targeted? Because we're seeing more and more censorship. It's not just financial control. It's actual censorship and, shutting down gatekeeping sites, all that kind of stuff. So I got really interested in decentralized tech. But then I realized, and for me, it was kind of like the holy grail. I was thinking, well, decentralized tech will save us. That's all we need. And I soon realized that if we don't know how to use the decentralized tech privately, if the government bans the tech, sure, the protocol itself might be uncensorable or, censorship resistant. But if they know you're using it, they'll just target you. They'll just go after individuals. And so I realized, if we don't know how to use the internet privately, all this amazing decentralized technology that was being built with Web 3.0 wouldn't be accessible to anyone. We wouldn't be able to take advantage of it. And so I wanted to see kind of this underground railroad of all this uncensorable technology be built out. And in order for us to actually make sure we could access it into the future, privacy became a super big focus of mine. When I realized when I made that pivot and I was like, oh my God, they just target the individuals. It kind of started out as a thought experiment. And this was years and years and years and years ago at this stage. But it kind of started out if I needed to use the internet privately, could I? I don't need to. I have nothing to hide. I'm a normal person. And so then I just started kind of diving into it. I was like, okay, if I needed to access this privately, could I? And the more I dove in, I was like, wow, the surveillance state is incredibly, it's pervasive. It's in everything we do. And opting out isn't as simple as toggling a user function. And so I've been in that rabbit hole for years and years at this stage. Now I have a 501c3 dedicated to this because it became clear that this is an incredibly hard issue. No one is doing the work. The people who are building the tools are getting no support. And this idea that, I'll just explore privacy when I need it isn't going to cut it because privacy could be outlawed by the time that comes around. In fact, it almost surely will be. They're already arresting privacy developers. I think today they just changed the Clarity Act to remove any protections for people building decentralized tech. Before it was built in to say, we won't go after people building decentralized software as a money transmitter. They removed that. Politics isn't going to save us, as far as I can see, if we just leave it to the people who are currently doing the politics stuff. So we kind of need to fight the battle on all fronts at this stage and double down.
Yeah, one quick thing. There's a lot to unpack there, and I know you have limited time. So normally, I think I took notes, and I would normally double down on a lot of things you covered. But the one thing I do want to touch on is, I think, and you kind of allude to this, that people in a decentralized world just assume because something is decentralized, it means it comes along with privacy. So do you mind just quickly touching on that misconception and how you see it and why that is maybe not always the case?
Oh, yeah. I would say it's rarely the case, actually. And you take Bitcoin as an example. In Bitcoin's early years, and I was, a victim to this mentality as well at the time, there was this idea that because it's pseudonymous, all you had to do was just not link your real world identity and you could remain private. And people don't understand how many touch points link your real world identity. It's almost impossible to not link your real world identity. The only question is someone going to come looking? And that's not a robust safety strategy. You're just hoping someone doesn't want to, de-anonymize you. And so, decentralized tech, it's only in really the recent years that I've seen a bit of a pivot and people start to really focus on this as the priority that it should be. Again, we're so focused on the decentralized infrastructure of something. If there's no choke point, we can't stop the system. And that's true. You can't stop the system. You can target individuals everywhere, and a system can keep running. I mean, you can throw the developers in jail. The system will keep running. But individuals will not have the freedom to use that system safely if they don't know how to use the internet privately. And that is the big difference that people are just not thinking about. They're just thinking about availability as enough. As long as it's available, that's all I need. No, you need to protect yourself from those who don't want you using these things. So, I see a lot of really bad privacy leakage in the Web3 world. I'm seeing definitely a change in mindset now as more and more people are focused on fixing that. There was a great thread today based on a video that came out recently about the Kahaku wallet. So the entire kind of Ethereum community is jumping on board and explaining all the touch points where you're just leaking privacy all the time. So definitely an interesting change of pace now. It's just a question of, okay, now that people are interested, can we ramp up fast enough to actually make up for lost time? Because the surveillance state has been expanding so quickly. Privacy tech has not kept up. So now that people are starting to wake up, can we hit the ground running and actually trying to make a dent?
Yeah, it's been cool. I was doing marketing for Cake Wallet, and so I started to see some of these emerging technologies, like silent payments for Bitcoin, is now a larger discussed thing in this decentralized world. We have MWeb for Litecoin. Monero's been there. I know Zcash is also something that you're a big fan of. And so we have these tools that are starting to come up and they're getting stronger and stronger. So I'm hoping that continues to happen in a decentralized space. But I feel like in some ways, like you said, this decentralization fights privacy sometimes. We see it's hard because to make things more open and sometimes interoperable with different people, sometimes you have to expose a little bit more data to make that happen. So it's hard to do both. But without getting too far down that rabbit hole, you started, or I don't know if you started, so maybe you can explain this to me, but my understanding is you started with creating content and building awareness for individuals, but now you're talking more about politics, you're talking more about your 501c3 and these other things that you're trying to do. So do you mind kind of explaining the ways to target this? So, the way I'm hearing this is maybe education, policy, technology is kind of like the three main things. I think the Calyx Institute uses kind of a triangle. Those are the three parts of the triangle. Do you mind explaining kind of the areas that you see yourself and the things that you're doing in those areas right now? And maybe that leads into kind of the policy work that you're trying to get into.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the great three pillars that you laid out. I have like a kind of different categorization that I like to use as well, which is you've got legislation, you've got litigation, and you've got technology. And I've always been the biggest fan of technology just because I don't like the idea of having to kowtow to politicians to beg for rights that should be mine. So if I can just like give people the tools for freedom today and they can just reclaim the freedom of speech and, freedom to associate and financial freedom, that to me is like better than doing a 10-year policy battle where your, fight is going to get watered down by people who don't understand the downstream consequences as it relates to freedom of what they're doing. I just see technology as being really impactful. And that shifted a little bit because now that the developers of privacy tools have started to be arrested, I kind of realized wow, we need to be in the trenches fighting on all fronts. So
for
each of those three
people who
areas.
don't know, do you mind expanding on those stories? Because I know some people don't know what you're referring to.
Yeah. So stories, for example, you've got Keanu Rodriguez is a great example, and his partner Bill, who created the Samurai wallet. And they essentially were like, it's insane. I laugh because it like hurts so much to hear this. They did nothing wrong. They were put in jail for being an unlicensed money transmitter, for not registering as a money transmitter. Now, FinCEN, the regulatory agency in charge of regulating money transmitters, literally said Samurai is not a money transmitter. And yet the Southern District of New York arrested them and threw them in jail for being an unlicensed money transmitter. I mean, it's egregious corruption. And really throughout the whole trial, if you just look at all the talking points that were brought forth, first of all, they were not allowed to justify why they built Samurai and explain, first of all, they weren't even allowed a motion to dismiss, right? They ended up taking like a plea deal before this could even get in front of a jury because it was so clear that the judge just would not let information be presented. And so they had this amazing motion to dismiss where they had case law, they had Supreme Court precedent, they had all of these things saying if you just build a tool, that doesn't make you part of a conspiracy to do these illegal things. This stuff has happened for forever. And just building this neutral technology, it doesn't matter if you know theoretically whether it could be used by bad people for bad things. It actually is irrelevant when it comes to case law and Supreme Court precedents. Anyway, these people have been persecuted because they really were like staunch privacy advocates. And that is like Roman Storm is another one who's currently, fighting ongoing battles about this, another developer with Tornado Cash. So there are all these people in primarily the financial privacy space who are being targeted right now. But that's just because financial space is so heavily regulated, right? You're going to see this just skyrocket and balloon to cover all kinds of privacy areas in the next, 3 years. So mark my words on that one. This is absolutely going to expand. And it's expanded before. I mean, they've already gone after people who've created like private telephones and things like that. Slightly different examples, but we're going to see more and more entrance into that space. So from my perspective, as soon as you start seeing these people involved in these litigation battles, that's a sign to me that we need to be part of this kind of litigation battle, either supporting their cases, helping them set up better precedents. Because once you get a bad precedent, like you create neutral technology and you're liable for all the users who use that open source neutral technology, like that's a terrible precedent. So we kind of need to be in the trenches fighting that. And then on the legislative side, I also saw how easy it was in the last, especially the last few years. We've just seen politicians signing away our rights every single day with these atrocious bills where they're like, yeah, we're just going to gatekeep the internet. Now you have to have an ID to use a browser, and the fact that they do it with such ease and so quickly, they sign a thing and they're done. Like you can no longer have like a free internet. Oh, now your operating system requires you to like verify your age before you use it. Oh, your 3D printer will no longer actually be able to be used for decentralized means. It's all going to be centrally controlled and they're going to block you building certain things. I mean, that for me was a giant warning sign where I'm like, okay, so we need to be in the legislative fight too. We need to be fighting in every single one of these battles. And yeah, it's going to be exhausting. And yeah, we're all going to be like just so sick of it by the end of it. And it's going to be relentless. And they have way more resources. But we have no other option. We have to do this because otherwise you're literally just saying, okay, too many of my freedoms have been taken away. I guess I'll let them take the rest. It's like, no, that's not how it works. You just keep fighting and you try to preserve every last freedom that you can. So I hope that people are kind of getting like the bat signal and seeing it, being like, okay, it's my call to action. How can I participate in these three fights?
Yeah, I want to ask you about now the bill, but right before then, a question that came up. I just put out a video like an hour ago about privacy doomerism because I watched an MKBHD video yesterday about Android's new launch from Google and how they're calling it the biggest launch of all time. And believe it or not, this is, MKBHD. This is a very popular just tech channel, has nothing to do with privacy. Lots of comments are in there that are like, oh my God, it seems like a privacy nightmare. But on all of them, they're just littered with responses saying, well, why are you on the internet? LOL. Like privacy was dead long ago. I'm sure you see these on your YouTube channel. We've been getting a lot more of them in the last few years. And so for me, there's this doomerism in these last few years that people feel quite helpless. So before you touch on the bill, why are you optimistic? Why should anyone bother even caring or trying? You're speaking as if, well, we still need to fight. But if someone's listening to this and they're going, I don't know what to fight for, what would you tell that person before we talk about what you want to do?
Fight for your rights. Fight for a world where your choices aren't controlled by a select few who happen to control the most powerful technology and, surveillance apparatus that we've ever seen in history. First of all, we have reason to be optimistic. Privacy tech has never been better. We have never seen such cutting-edge privacy tooling out there. All of this R&D into homomorphic encryption and zero-knowledge proofs and all this stuff is incredible. Just even the idea of Web 3.0 is incredible. This idea that we could have all of these things and communicate with zero gatekeepers and you create rails that can't be shut down. This stuff is so incredible. For me, the issue is that not enough people are using it, not enough people know it exists, not enough people understand it, and simultaneously, governments are trying to shut down a lot of it because they see this as a tool for freedom. And so it means that it's going to be a hard battle, but it's definitely not over. For me, I see technology as it's neutral, and that includes AI. A lot of people feel the doomerism because they see AI as being largely hijacked for surveillance, which I agree. It has been overwhelmingly hijacked for surveillance technology. AI itself is neutral when it comes to whether it could be used for good or bad. You can absolutely build incredible privacy tooling that makes it so much easier for you to protect yourself with AI. So for example, you might have something on your machine and you use AI to analyze all the telemetry leaving your device and figuring out, okay, who is spying on me, and then getting the AI to help you plug it. You've never had that capability before in history. Unless you're a developer, you couldn't do that. But now you can.
Even Molvat, I think, released a feature, DAITA data. I believe it uses AI to add noise so that it's hard for people to do inspection in the traffic. That's
exactly.
a small example. Yeah.
Yeah, white noise is another great example. You know, an individual can't create enough white noise to really fuel these systems, but a convincing AI can, especially in a world of deep fakes. So of course they can figure out how to create traffic and things that can be indistinguishable. So using AI to at the end of the day, AI is essentially powerful compute. And whether you love it or hate it, it's not going anywhere. This is invading every single thing we do. So you can either leave that powerful compute in the hands of your enemies who are trying to surveil and track everything you're doing, or you can say, okay, I may not like this, or maybe you do like it, but regardless, I'm going to pick up the gauntlet and I'm going to figure out how to use this to protect myself. You can even use this for offense instead of defense. There are a million ways that you can use this powerful tool to your advantage. So that goes for all of this tech. The way I see it, people of super doomeristic, that's a new word, because AI really put this front and center for a lot of people. You know, you've had governments and large corporations with incredible computing power for a really long time. And you've had data brokers that have been collecting everything we've been doing for a really long time. And they're analyzing this and using inference to figure out and predictive actions and capabilities and target us better. These tools have been in the hands of elite few for a long, long time. And we've never paid attention to it. You know, most people had no idea what's going on or how advanced this stuff was. And then suddenly we have tools where you can literally run a 7 billion parameter model on your local, hardware, your local computer. And suddenly you have comparable tech to what only giant governments and corporations used to have. That's empowering. That's a reason to rejoice, because what we're seeing is not AI just came onto the scene and it's destroyed everything. It's no, suddenly individuals have the same power in their hands as other people have previously been using, to target them and to oppress them. This is great to democratize this technology so that it can't be used as a tool for abuse. So often we see in history when governments or corporations have a stranglehold over certain technology, it does become a weapon for abuse. And that has been trending in that direction with privacy disappearing for a long time. Suddenly we all have incredibly powerful compute in our back pocket, and we should use that power. We should, lean into that power. It's not a time for doomerism. It's a time to learn how to leverage this technology to, save the world, essentially.
Yeah. I recently had one of Mozilla's higher up individual from Mozilla to just talk about their new AI stuff, which was deeply controversial, as you could expect, because they're rolling out AI features in Firefox. But his whole point is do we really want Google and a few other AI companies to be the only people at the table talking about how we integrate AI in our browsers? And they only roll out AI features that integrate with their AI models. So he's we're building the alternative where you can hook in using any AI model. It can be open source. It can be, you can bring your own model. So I went in knowing it would be a bit controversial, but I think it's a good testament to how this is, that's someone who's kind of showing up and trying to see how this can be used for good, because otherwise it's just dominated by bad people.
And on that note, people can't throw their hands up in the air. That whole doomerist culture of well, then throw out your devices, get off the internet. It's that won't save you.
You get a lot of those.
Flock cameras are everywhere. Throwing out your devices won't save you as you walk down the street and get captured by every CCTV in the region.
That's why you go in a forest and...
Yeah, in the forest. Well, now we've got satellites with high resolution imagery and drones that will find you. And you can't opt out, guys. Gone is the era where you could be a Luddite and say, okay, I won't participate. You're forced to participate. So now you have to decide which weapon are you going to put in your arsenal. It's just opting out just isn't an option anymore.
That's a good way to put it. Your bill. What have you done?
All right.
What happened?
So Ludlow Institute helped create a bill called the Surveillance Accountability Act. And this bill basically just says what the Fourth Amendment already says, which is if you need to do a search on someone, you need a warrant. And it's seems very uncontroversial. Yet we reached out to over 200 officers and only 2 people, signed onto it. We worked closely with Massey's office actually to kind of format this. And really what this comes down to is this fact that warrant requirements were set up And if you're like not from America, basically, there's founding fathers, you have like a revolution, and you have people who are really angry because they're fighting against the British crown, and the king's men, they basically had this era of tyranny where there's such abuse of power, where they're using things called general warrants to literally just like go into people's homes, rifle through their stuff, try to find any kind of seditious material. So like if you criticize the crown, they would just go through everything in your life until they could find whatever fragments to piece together whatever narrative they wanted. And when you have enough access to someone's life, you can, piece together whatever narrative you want. So this was being abused in Britain. So when the founders were writing the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, they were like, okay, well, how do we stop this super invasive intrusion into people's lives so that they can have the freedom to live comfortably and safely and not feel like they have to look over their shoulder, and so that they could exercise freedom of speech, so that they can criticize the crown and like not feel like they could be in danger for doing that. The Fourth Amendment said, okay, no more general warrants. If you want to do a search, it has to be specific. You have to say the person and the place and what you expect to find. You basically have to make a case for probable cause. And then they bring in a second branch of government, and they have to make that case to the judiciary in front of a judge. And the judge has to agree with you that you have enough probable cause to invade this person's life, to intrude and do this search. And so the Fourth Amendment says like no unreasonable searches and seizures, and then lays out this kind of warrant requirement. So fast forward to 2026, the judiciary is nowhere in sight. There's zero accountability, and no one's getting warrants anymore. They're literally just buying giant data sets from data brokers and searching them at will. They're literally just going to Google and saying, hey, search your database, intrude into all of this person's private things. No probable cause at all. No reason. They're going on fishing expeditions. And this is like really, really scary. This is exactly the thing that leads to abuse of power, where if you embarrass the government, suddenly you could become a target, and someone might go through your life with this unfettered access and piece together a narrative that they want to put together in order to target you. So this bill basically says like enough is enough. We have to stop pretending that searching Google's database isn't a search. We have to stop pretending that, a query of your own database that you bought from a data broker isn't a search. So it defines search. It says a search is a meaningful investigation of someone. And, if you want to do a search on someone, if a government agent wants to do a search on someone, they need a warrant. And we're very careful in this. We don't want to stop law enforcement doing their job, right? We want to catch bad people. And I hear so much pushback from people who are like, stop, don't get in the way of law enforcement. Of course we want to catch bad people. It's like, right. And this bill doesn't stop that. It just says they need probable cause, which is exactly what the Bill of Rights says, is baked into these fundamental freedoms of the founding of America, that you don't want abuse of power and you want to enable the individual to protect themselves. So it says that, and then it also has this other part, the accountability part of this, that says if they don't get a warrant, you could sue them. Which is huge, because so often you have all kinds of like qualified immunity and like no pushback when people with power abuse that power and break the law. And so this says, no, you can be sued. An individual has a private right of action, and they can actually sue you if you do not do this. So making people like individually liable was a big part of this. And that's basically the bill in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's been a problem for years on Surveillance Report, my weekly news podcast. I'd say almost weekly, if not every other week. There's some story about some court case or some situation where law enforcement or the federal government essentially captured user data without ever getting a warrant for it. And they just tap on a third-party data broker, they tap on a big tech company, they tap on a private company that is allowed to collect it, and then they don't actually go through the proper channels that they're supposed to go through. So this is a widespread problem. Our audience probably knows very well about this. Now, you mentioned people had some pushback regarding the, I guess I could see someone, right? And I'm sure you're not disillusioned by when you put these kind of things forward. It could sound like, oh, they don't want to catch bad guys, but you're being very direct about, we still want to catch bad guys. But now that person might ask, so what is the point of this? So do you mind speaking a little bit to what are some of those concerns that you have, something tangible that you can speak to say, hey, no, actually, we want to catch bad people. We just want to stop X from happening. So what is X for that person to understand?
Yeah, I mean, X is abuse of power, which we see routinely. When you don't have a paper trail, when you don't have accountability or oversight, that always leads invariably to abuse of power. So one of the things, I think it was in the 40s, the Supreme Court had a great quote, because sometimes we think of law enforcement or we think of government as this monolithic entity. Government is a single thing. It's not. We have 3 distinct branches of government, and sometimes they work at odds, sometimes they work in unison, but the idea is to spread out that power instead of centralizing it to try to avoid abuse of power. With warrant requirements kind of out the window, we've lost some of those guardrails, and that's just going to lead to terrible abuse of power. You should never have law enforcement deciding on the limits of their own power. And why is that? Let's presume that there's never corruption. Let's presume that no one ever chooses to abuse power or do bad things, and they're all saints. I mean, obviously that's a terrible assumption, but even giving that benefit of the doubt, law enforcement have their own agenda. Their purview is to solve the case, to close the loop, to put the dots together and figure out where they lead. They have a narrative in their head. And so what was so important about this guardrail was to make them actually have to slow down and think carefully about this so they just don't go after innocent people. There are so many cases where innocent people go to jail because it seems like all of the evidence leads up to it, but it turns out to be wrong. The narrative that they put together, it seems to make sense, but it didn't make sense. It was incorrect. So this idea that law enforcement should have someone else judging the intrusion into people's life is super important. They have this agenda, solve the case. The judiciary is meant to be the one that is not super involved in this. They are detached. They're somewhat neutral in theory, and they should be able to look at this and say, is that a justified intrusion into someone's life? And that is super important. They are weighing what law enforcement wants to do, which is get bad guys, with, okay, well, how do we do that while protecting individual rights? And civil liberties, all of that sort of thing. Now, in the 40s, the Supreme Court said, they actually referred to law enforcement, this competitive enterprise of ferreting out crime, because they recognize that, yes, it is often competitive. If you catch the bad guys, you'll get a promotion. There's a lot of inbuilt incentives into this, which is why you want this detached, and they called it a detached and neutral magistrate to weigh in. So that's the idea of the warrant requirement. It's not because these are bad people necessarily. It is just because they have their own agenda, and it's super important to have someone who's not day-to-day involved in this, maniacal drive to find the bad person. You want them to have a outsider perspective to say, okay, you really want to intrude on this person's life. What's your probable cause? What do you expect to find? Why is this person in particular? And this not only stops abuse of power, well, in theory, it definitely curtails it, because someone has to make their case. They can't just say, this person said something bad about the king, and therefore, we're going to go through the stuff. No, the judiciary is meant to be there to be okay, we'll sound this out. But it also creates a paper trail. The number of searches that go on right now where there's zero accountability whatsoever and zero paper trail of this. With the FISA courts, for example, hundreds of thousands of queries into these databases where the FISA court found that 7 of them were legitimate in one of the most recent audits. That's insane, right? That sort of lack of accountability needs to be stopped. So that's kind of what we want to put guardrails back on to protect.
So let me try to summarize this, and you can throw it back at me if I want to change it. So pretty much in law enforcement and just the way this government, not just a single government as you expressed, but the people who make up the government, they have a job to keep people safe and catch bad people and make sure everything's moving accordingly. Pretty much what you're saying is that the current ratio of the amount of searches they're doing isn't actually corresponding to the people that are actually doing something wrong. And a lot of innocent people are getting caught in there. And so would you say it's accurate that your bill is trying to help correct that ratio so that there was more accountability and that the number of people that they're going after is actually equivalent to the people actually doing something wrong? by the law.
Yeah,
Is
and it's
that
not
accurate?
just a ratio, it's qualitative as well.
Okay.
So quantity is a huge thing. We've just have like unfettered access to our lives and infinite searches because they're querying their own databases. They're just buying the data instead of ever getting a warrant. So it's like it is quantitative, but it's also qualitative in that they have to prove themselves before intruding. You know, it's not just the hassle of having a government intrude in your life that you protect against. It's the power that comes from information. And you don't want to just have unfettered power in the hands of like the most powerful entities of society. You don't want to just keep giving them like all the information in the world because that entrenches their power. You know, that gives them the ability in theory to go after opposition party, go after independent media, go after investigative journalists and whistleblowers and, you know, dissidents, protest movements, shut down protest movements in advance. If you just have unfettered access to all the information about someone's life, you can preemptively decide who is going to be a problem and silence them in advance, right? So it's just huge amount of power. So what this requirement does is it says, no, it has to be qualitative. You have to have probable cause. You can't just have unfettered access at any time you want. You have to actually make a case that they committed a crime.
Why do you think, because I think people actually really, this has been a guarantee for hundreds of years now, that, you know, law enforcement can't just walk into your house. I think a lot of people know and understand, oh, I can say you need a warrant to just enter my house. Why do you think the digital realm is different? Why do you think people hold a different standard? And nowadays, you can actually get a lot more sensitive data digitally than you ever could from just walking into someone's house. Yet people seem to have a lower standard for that. Do you have any speculation on why that is?
Yeah, it's a few reasons. First of all, digital surveillance is not visible to the eye. You know, it's not like someone's pounding on your door and you get that physical interaction with them. You know, when that happens, it's very clear when a government is intruding into your protected space. When they're querying Google's database and going through all of your emails from the last 15 years and, you know, checking all of your private messages and checking, you know, the flock cameras to see everywhere you've traveled and that, like all of this stuff, they could do it without you even knowing. And that's huge power that they get from getting access to that information without you even knowing, realizing that the scales have been tipped away from you. And so that just the fact that they're not aware of it is a big reason for a long time. And second, you know, we set up these atrocious precedents in the court. So we decided on this thing called the reasonable expectation of privacy test. And this was set up in a case called Katz. And this was in the 70s where, you know, it's pre-internet, right? And in the Katz case, they basically, it was a case about a telephone booth and the government like bugged the booth. And it was a case that said, okay, was this person in the booth protected under the Fourth Amendment? And it turns out that, yes, he was, because there was a reasonable expectation of privacy when they went into this glass enclosure, even though it was a public space, this idea that they were still protected. Now, how do you decide whether something is reasonable? Like, what is someone's expectation of privacy? How do you answer that question? So then the courts came up with this way to answer it called the third party doctrine. And they said, okay, well, if you give your data to a third party, you've given up your Fourth Amendment protections over it. You can no longer reasonably expect to have privacy. Now, this, again, was in the 70s, where it was pertaining to very narrow types of records, very limited information. One of them was bank records, one of them was telephone records. And that precedent, unfortunately, has been held by the Supreme Court all the way to today. And the internet runs entirely on third parties. Every single thing we do, runs on third parties. So we went from this precedent that was set up where it's like, okay, a person understands the telephone number, the telephone company knows which number you dialed. So they reasonably gave up their privacy to, we're presuming that an individual, when they pick up their phone, understands that, okay, so the CCP is in our critical infrastructure. They're going to be collecting my data. Verizon's going to collect it. They're selling it to third parties. They're going to take that data. I've got all of these femto cells that are intercepting the call to track my location. They're like rogue cell towers that are being sold to the mafia in some, other country. No one is picking that up and saying, by dialing this number, I'm voluntarily giving up my right to privacy because it's going through third-party rails. It's just insane. So the Supreme Court absolutely needs to, and the courts in general, need to update their idea of what a reasonable expectation of privacy. No, the average person is not making these calculations before they use the digital world. Most of them don't even understand what is going on. They have no idea how this technology works. And for the courts to argue that they have voluntarily given up their right to privacy in this spaces is really crazy to me. I mean, I'll give you a different example, right? If I sign a contract with a company, and that company says, I'm going to protect your data and I'm never going to share it with anyone, even the government, and you have a reasonable expectation of privacy in this, I would, as a logical person, presume I have a reasonable expectation of privacy. We literally just signed a contract that says, I'll protect my privacy. The courts say that that contract is completely irrelevant when it comes to Fourth Amendment law. They say they disregard it. They say it doesn't matter what contract you have. That was a third party and we set up a precedent in the 70s. And so we're just going to stick with that. That's atrocious. We need to update this for the digital age. We need to understand that digital data is property. When I give my photos to Google, I am not giving up the right to that photos. They're still my photos, and so there's this idea of bailment, which is another way to address this issue, right? When I give my keys to the valet, that's a bailment. I don't give away the right to my car because I handed my keys to a third party. I expect they'll give those keys back. When I take my dog to the kennel, that's a bailment. They're going to give my dog back, right? I didn't hand over the rights. So if I give my data to a company and we sign a contract saying they will protect the privacy, I have not given up my right to that data. It should be specified in the contract and protectable under that contract. But that's just not the way we do it right now. So we have terrible court precedents and lack of awareness, for my very long-winded answer, for why this has become so normalized today, and people throw their hands up in the air and just think, well, of course the government can get access to everything in the digital space. No, that's not the way it should be. And we need to fix it before the balance of power tips so far away from the individual that, we can't reclaim our freedoms.
Right. And so how does, the bill that you're proposing, what does realistic success look like for you? I know we talked a little bit backstage and you were kind of sharing, you have different expectations than maybe getting this passed right now, but it sounds like you have, you're planting seeds. So do you want to maybe speak to that?
Yeah, this is a multi-year effort. So right now, no politicians are getting constituents calling them to say, I'm a single issue voter. My issue is privacy, right? It just doesn't happen. And so that's why it's so easy for these politicians to sign away our rights. That's why when it comes to the next age verification bill, they won't hesitate, because they have lobbyists at their door every day saying how much children need to be protected and how, these handcuffs on the internet will help. They have no one from the privacy space calling them and saying, I will not vote you back into power if you get rid of my privacy. So through this multi-year effort, obviously, it's going to be really hard to get this bill passed because no politician currently supports it. As I said, we've reached out to over 200 officers. And even though everyone was like, oh, well, this is important, but not my top priority, we need to make it their top priority, right? Politicians really care largely about being reelected. It sounds very cynical, but I have a very cynical view of politics. So if we can tell them that actually there is, their future political career on the line, if they actually don't reflect the will of their constituents, there's power in that. So I would say the biggest thing that we could do right now, I would love to see more co-sponsors for this bill. So call your representative, ask them to co-sponsor the Surveillance Accountability Act. That would be a huge thing. From there, we start to get the narrative rolling. It's just about making officers aware that privacy is a big issue for more people than they realized. They don't come to that awareness unless we're really vocal about it.
Yeah, and I guess this is a perfect segue into kind of the last section of this interview for me, which is practical things for everybody. It's going to touch on some things you covered earlier as well. I think my first question is, I think at the very beginning you said politics won't save us. And right now you just said you're cynical about politics, and yet we're also kind of counting on politics a little bit here to try to help us. So do you mind sharing, this difficult relationship and how you kind of grapple with that?
Yeah. So I used to be a completely don't even bother with politics person, more of an agorist who's just reclaim your freedom through tech. You can do it today instantly. But
which is common. We see this in our community a lot as well.
Yeah, but I think we need to fight on all fronts now, honestly, because it is so easy for politicians to just sign away privacy. And so I want to see pushback. I want to see these people who are just gambling with our freedom be held accountable for this. I want to see people push back against them. I'm kind of disgusted by a lot of the stuff that goes on. And I want to see these people, like, they shouldn't go to bed at night thinking, I did a really great thing, making all these people vulnerable by mandating the collection of their data in these databases that will end up being hacked by people and end up all over the dark web. And then they'll have someone do a wrench attack at their front door. Like, I don't want them to have this false sense that they did good in the world by eliminating privacy in society. I want them to understand that they have paved the way to one of the most dystopian futures we could possibly imagine if we don't course correct. So I want to see people reach back out to them. I want to see people voice their support for privacy legislation so that they understand that people care about this stuff and maybe they will think twice. The way I see it is that tech will be the thing that saves us, but we need to slow down the rapid expansion of the surveillance state. We need to at least be trying to slow that movement. It's going to keep continuing in that direction, but we need to make it move slower. And we can do that to buy us time because the proliferation of tech tools isn't there yet. We need to get it there. And so we need all of this steamrolling ahead with mandated ID verification to really take a back seat. So I have a complicated relationship with politics. And I would say that politics alone is not going to save us. And ultimately, politics will not be the thing that saves us. We're only heading in one direction with that. But fighting the political battle can help save us by buying us time for all of these other battles that I think will ultimately be the tools for freedom that we can rely on.
Yeah, I get the comment constantly, and I've been getting it for years now, which is people are like, I don't know why you even bother talking about these bills or anything, because people say it doesn't matter, it's all about the tools, and then vice versa. You get people on both angles. But I like that you take a very nuanced kind of middle ground, that there is a place for both of them, especially right now. Now, there's two things, because I've been doing a lot of coverage for age verification, chat control, etc. All these different problems. They perform very well on YouTube. It resonates with people. People get passionate about this. People are getting involved. But I still see two overwhelming comments I wanted to ask you about. The first one is, we talked about doomerism already from the privacy angle, but I see equal doomerism for this whole phrase, which is contact your reps. A lot of people hear this advice. They go, well, they're not going to listen to me, so why am I going to bother? How would you address that comment, which I'm sure you see a lot too as a response to this, to what you're trying to do?
So I'm going to give you a peek behind the curtain of how laws get passed. It's total political game. It is all about, leveraging positions and agreeing to sign on to this thing so that you can get your thing. But ultimately, the end game is one thing, and it is re-election. You may have a handful, a smattering of people who are in politics just for, fighting for what they truly believe in. Those people are few and far between. Some would argue that maybe they don't exist at all, but they're definitely rare. Politicians want to get re-elected. There are two ways that a politician can get reelected. One of the main ways, which I would say almost everyone does, is just campaign contributions. They'll literally give you a price. If you go to an office and say, sign on to this bill, they'll basically say, okay, well, that'll be $30,000. And of course, they don't phrase it so bluntly, but that's the gist of it. You need to give $30,000 as a lobbyist to their next campaign in order to actually get this passed. And if you can offer that support, they might agree to vote for your bill, which is just horrendous. Now, the route that I went was not that route because we're a tiny 501c3 nonprofit in the privacy space and obviously don't have money to just be given to politicians. And even if we did, it just seems so gross. The other way that politicians can get reelected other than campaign contributions is their constituents. If constituents do not vote for them or tell them this is a single issue and I will not vote for this, that gets them worried as well. So actually, there is tremendous power because politicians are so preoccupied with re-election. There's tremendous power in voicing your opinion and saying, you cannot vote for this. I will not vote you in. I'm a single issue voter. If you vote for this ID verification law, or, I will vote for you if you are someone who respects my privacy. Here is a bill that will really protect privacy in the digital age. I want to see you vote for it. I want to see you co-sponsor it. So these things do make a difference. I don't think that we should feel that our actions don't have any impact. Basically, if you get 10 people to call a specific rep, that's enough to at least get that rep briefed, that, okay, 10 people talked about this issue and it'll be part of their briefing. You get 100 people call up, that's a bigger briefing right there. You get 1,000 people in a district call up and suddenly they're like, okay, this seems like a really big issue for our constituents. Maybe this should be part of our stump speech during our re-election campaign. In aggregate, we have huge power. And we should not forget that. Sometimes as an individual, it feels overwhelming in this fight because it's David against Goliath. But ultimately, in aggregate, in solidarity with each other, we have huge power. So we actually need people to activate and, take a stand on this stuff and voice their opinion. If we all lie down flat and just say okay, there's nothing I can do. Why even bother? We do, all of us, and we do each of our neighbors and our family and our friends, we do them all a disservice. We understand that privacy is important, so we need to vocalize that with these people who decide on these policies for better or worse on all of our lives.
Yeah, beautifully stated. The second overwhelming thing I see, and then we'll kind of get into the last practical tips here, very common on these videos I make. Oh my gosh, I see so much finger pointing, right? It's those dirty Democrats are behind this. Those rascal Republicans, those crazy centrists are the ones behind this. So can you maybe shed light on kind of the partisan/bipartisan angle of, because people hear politics and they instantly think, oh, there must be a side to this. So can you speak to where this bill fits into that, if this bill is supposed to be partisan or bipartisan, and how you personally view these kind of debates?
Yeah, privacy is a universal right. Privacy protects everyone in society. It doesn't matter which way you vote. You need privacy because if one day someone comes to power who doesn't like someone like you, privacy is the only thing that's going to protect you. So I think that overwhelmingly this issue is bipartisan. And we see that because every time, if the Republicans are in power, all the Democrats are pro-privacy. And when the Democrats are in power, all the Republicans are pro-privacy. It blows my mind. And what we see year after year is the surveillance state gets bigger and bigger. It does not matter which side is in power. Surveillance powers are going through the roof. It is not just a matter of policies, which are just being expanded. We've got the Bank Secrecy Act regime, which just gets expanded year after year. We have Pfizer 702 that just gets reauthorized every single time. We have the advances in technology where we're not even deciding legislation or litigating this stuff. We're just quietly implementing it. So now we have drones surveying properties, and we have flock cameras tracking everywhere you go, and we have governments putting SDKs in apps to monitor your movements and harvest your social graph and access things that the average person has no idea they're getting access to. So surveillance capabilities are skyrocketing year after year. It does not matter who is in power. And I think that all of this partisan politics is such a distraction, in my opinion. It's look over here, guys, while we just slowly grow the surveillance infrastructure year after year. And honestly, it's so tempting to every regime that comes to power because it seemed dangerous when it's in their hands, but now it's in your hands, so you can use it as a tool for good. And you have to kind of remind these people, it's not about whether or not you're going to use this as a tool for good. It's whether you are implementing this systemic regime that has the possibility to eliminate freedom for all future generations. Do we want our children to grow up in a world where they no longer have the option of privacy? Because that is what we are doing right now. Every administration that comes into power thinks it's okay now because we control the keys. No, they are setting up a landscape that will be inherited by someone else. And one day, day, this is a ticking time bomb, and one day someone will come into power and it's game over. There will be so much surveillance. We will not have opposition parties that can push back. We will not have whistleblowers talking about corruption and accountability. We will not have investigative journalists speaking truth to power. We won't have any of these self-correcting mechanisms in society anymore because they can't function safely because no one has a private space to retreat to anymore to protect themselves. So yeah, it's a completely bipartisan issue. People should not be distracted by whoever happens to be in power at any given time. This is systemic, and we need to make a change.
Yeah, and so if people are hearing this and they go, all right, I'm inspired, I'm going to get involved. Can you just give them the quick ways to do that? As easy as possible. And of course, we'll try to leave things linked in the description and show notes, whether it's your bill or just generally speaking.
For sure. I would say go to surveillanceiaccountability.com. On the support page there, we have a link that shows you how to find your rep if you don't know who your rep is. We have a script you can literally copy and paste, that says, co-sponsor this bill. That would be a huge support. That is a big thing people could do right now. And really, as I said, we don't expect this bill to pass. This is a multi-year effort for us. And a lot of these bills, they will die in committee, they might sit there for a while. But we need to get this information to politicians. We need to tell them privacy is a value, because this doesn't just affect this bill. It affects every surveillance bill that comes across their desk that they decide whether or not they're going to vote for. They need to know that we care about privacy. So please reach out to your rep and tell them that you care about privacy. I think just constantly trying to proliferate privacy tools. So all of the great, channels out there like yours, if you have a video that you come across that you love that teaches people how to integrate one of these privacy tools into your life, share it with people. Maybe handhold them. Try to get them onboarded on this. We need to onboard people to these tools. If we don't support the privacy ecosystem and give them our business, we're basically giving our money to their competitors who are just harvesting us for data. So we either support the people trying to build a better future, or we're supporting their competition. So with our choices, I really do think we need to just get more involved in the privacy ecosystem.
Yeah, really well said. And, there's also another hybrid option out there too. I know professionals out there really don't like some of the open source tools, whether it's image editing. I've seen a really good thing out there, which is if you're paying for Adobe, even if you're not going to use the open source alternatives, pay the same amount to the open source alternatives. So that way they can still eventually someday maybe compete, right? So that way you can still contribute to both. You don't have to choose one or the other. But obviously in the perfect world, we're doing only the better ones, right?
I'm going to do that. That's not something I do. I pay for all the free tools that are out there. I will donate to them because we need to keep this sustainable for them. But now I'm going to start implementing what you just said. Even if I don't use them, can I contribute to a world where one day they might be good enough that I can use them?
Yeah. Well, Naomi, it's been awesome to have you on. I'd love to have you back on at some point. You're awesome. And I know a lot of our audience love your work. And I'm just really grateful to have you you're still doing an incredible coverage on your channel with the content, but now you're even spreading a little bit wider and covering other places to be. And I know it's much appreciated. And so, I just want to thank you for your work. And thank you for everything you've done over the years.
Yeah, and thank you too for all of the work that you do. I'm so grateful that channels like yours exist. You do such tremendous good teaching people about these tools. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Naomi. I want to give a huge thanks to Naomi for the time and for the work, both public-facing and the legislative groundwork that doesn't make it onto a YouTube video. So I know she's covered videos about it as well. I'll leave her channel down in the description if you want to check out more of her and what she's doing. There's a huge overlap in the stuff that we talk about. And of course, I'm going to leave links to the bill that will also have instructions to contact your representatives. All of that's going to be down in the description. That can take 5 minutes, and it's part of the fight that we always talk about and can very much move the needle. This is one of my favorite interviews, and I really hope that you all took as much from it as I did. And that's why I like running this podcast. And so if you guys like this kind of stuff and you want to see more of it, you can join the Techlorians down in the description. We have a private Signal group. I have a private RSS feed so you can keep up with news and things that are happening. And we have some other perks down there. But most importantly, you get to keep this content going and growing, and we can get more really exciting guests. See you all next time on Techlore. Thank you all for watching, and don't forget to get involved.